I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time, touching up my lipstick with hands that trembled slightly from excitement. The parking garage beneath Marcus's building was dimly lit, but I could see enough to know I looked good tonight, better than I had in months. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. David's name flashed on the screen. "Have a good class, honey. Don't wait up for me." I smiled bitterly as I typed back, "Thanks. See you tomorrow morning. Love you." Love you. The words felt hollow now, just muscle memory from 8 years of marriage. When was the last time David and I had actually looked at each other? Really looked? When had we stopped being lovers and become roommates who shared a mortgage? I grabbed my yoga mat from the back seat, the prop that made my Tuesday night lies believable. If David ever bothered to check, he'd find my membership card to the downtown studio, receipts for classes I'd never attended. I'd become meticulous in my deception. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt eternal. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached Marcus's door. This was our 3rd month of stolen Tuesday evenings, and tonight was supposed to be special. He'd promised dinner, wine, candles, everything David never bothered with anymore. "You made it," Marcus said as he opened the door, that devastating smile spreading across his face. He was wearing the navy shirt that brought out his eyes, the one I'd told him looked incredible on him during our 2nd meeting. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I stepped inside, breathing in the scent of something delicious cooking in his kitchen. "Never," he said, pulling me close. "You're here now. That's all that matters." His lips found mine, soft and urgent in a way that made me forget everything else. My empty marriage, my guilt, the elaborate web of lies that had brought me here. This was what I'd been missing. This connection, this fire, this feeling of being desired. We broke apart when his smoke alarm started beeping. "The chicken!" Marcus rushed toward the kitchen, laughing. "So much for my romantic dinner." I followed him, watching as he rescued our meal from the oven. This was what I loved about him, how he could laugh at himself, how nothing ever seemed too serious or stressful. David would have been furious about burning dinner, would have ordered takeout with a tight jaw and disappointed silence. "It's perfect," I told Marcus, meaning it. Even slightly overdone, this meal represented more care and attention than David had shown me in years. Marcus wrapped his arms around me from behind as I stood at his kitchen window. "I missed you this week." "I missed you too." I leaned back against his chest, allowing myself to feel safe and wanted. David's been working late every night. I don't think he'd notice if I disappeared entirely. "His loss," Marcus murmured against my hair. "You deserve so much more than—" The sound of familiar laughter in the hallway outside made my blood turn to ice. "Emma, what's wrong?" Marcus felt the tension flood my body as David's voice carried through the thin apartment walls. I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone completely dry, my throat closing up like I was having an allergic reaction. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not tonight. "My husband," I managed to whisper, the words barely audible. "He's here." Marcus's face went white. "What? How is that possible?" I pressed my ear against his front door, praying I was imagining things, but there it was again, David's voice, closer now, discussing some project timeline with whoever he was talking to on the phone. "We've been so careful," I whispered frantically, grabbing Marcus's hands. My nails dug into his skin. How could he know? "He can't know," Marcus said, but his voice shook with uncertainty. "This has to be a coincidence." Footsteps stopped directly outside Marcus's door. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I was certain it would give me away. The hallway went quiet. Then came 3 sharp knocks that sounded like gunshots in the silence. "Marcus, it's David Chen from Pinnacle Marketing. We had an appointment to discuss the Campbell Project photos." The words hit me like a physical blow. The world tilted sideways as the impossible truth sank in. David knew Marcus professionally. This wasn't some cruel coincidence. This was my worst nightmare coming to life. "Oh God," I breathed, staring at Marcus in horror. "You know my husband?" He called last week about a photography job," Marcus stammered. I never made the connection. Chen is such a common name, and he never mentioned his wife. Another knock, more insistent this time. Marcus, are you there? I can reschedule if this is a bad time. No, Marcus called out, his voice artificially bright. Just give me 1 second. He turned to me with panic in his eyes. What do we do? I have to hide, I said, already moving toward his bedroom. There was nowhere else to go. The apartment was too small, too open. If David came inside, when he came inside, I'd be trapped. Emma, just handle this, I whispered urgently. Get him to leave, please. I slipped into Marcus's bedroom and closed the door as quietly as possible, my heart threatening to beat out of my chest. Through the thin walls, I heard Marcus open the front door. David, hey, come on in. Sorry, I was just finishing up some editing. No problem at all. David's voice filled the apartment. My secret sanctuary, the place where I came to escape from him. I brought the contracts we discussed. Sarah said you were the best photographer for this kind of campaign. Sarah, David's assistant, had recommended Marcus. The web of coincidences felt like the universe finally calling in its debts for all my lies and deception. I sank onto Marcus's bed, the same bed where we'd made love just last week, and listened to my two worlds colliding in the most devastating way possible. So the Campbell account is looking for something modern but approachable, David was saying, his voice relaxed and professional. Clean lines, natural lighting, you know the drill. I sat frozen on Marcus's bed, surrounded by evidence of our affair, his clothes scattered on the floor, wine glasses from last Tuesday's dinner still on the nightstand, a photo of us together tucked into his mirror frame. Absolutely, Marcus replied, but I could hear the strain in his voice. I've got some samples here that might work for their aesthetic. Papers rustled, chairs scraped across the floor. They were settling in for a proper business meeting while I hid like a guilty teenager, trapped in the bedroom of my lover. Sarah really talked you up, David continued. Said you had this incredible eye for capturing authentic moments. That's exactly what we need for this campaign. The irony was so bitter I nearly laughed out loud. If David only knew what kind of authentic moments Marcus had been capturing with his wife for the past 3 months. I appreciate the referral, Marcus said. Sarah seems like she really knows her stuff. She's been with the company for 5 years, knows everyone in the industry. David's voice carried that familiar note of professional pride. Actually, speaking of authentic moments, my wife Emma would love your work. She's been looking for a photographer for our anniversary photos. My breath caught in my throat. Marcus's response took an eternity to come. Emma. That's a beautiful name. The way he said it, with such careful, deliberate neutrality, made me want to scream. Here was the man who whispered my name like a prayer when we made love, forced to pretend he'd never heard it before. She is beautiful, David said, and I heard genuine warmth in his voice for the first time in months. We've been married 8 years next month. Time flies, you know? 8 years, Marcus repeated quietly. That's wonderful. More paper rustling, the clink of coffee cups. David was making himself comfortable, settling in for a long discussion about the very anniversary I'd been trying to escape from. Actually, you know what? David said suddenly. I think I left my portfolio in the car. Let me grab it. I want to show you the visual direction we're thinking. Sure, no problem. Footsteps moved toward the door. This was my chance, maybe my only chance to escape before David discovered me here. I stood up carefully, testing my weight on legs that felt like water. But as I moved toward the bedroom door, my purse strap caught on the corner of Marcus's nightstand. The purse fell, spilling its contents across the hardwood floor with a sound like thunder in the quiet apartment. Everything went silent. I held my breath, praying that somehow David was already in the elevator, that he hadn't heard the crash. But then came the sound I'd been dreading, footsteps returning, moving across the apartment with purpose. Everything okay in there? David's voice was closer now, and just outside the bedroom door. Marcus said something, but I couldn't hear it over the roar of blood in my ears. The door handle turned slowly, inevitably. and there stood my husband. David's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, devastating comprehension. His eyes took in everything: me sitting on another man's bed, my lipstick smudged, my hair disheveled, looking exactly like what I was. "Emma?" His voice was barely a whisper. Behind him, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face ashen with guilt and terror. The three of us formed a perfect triangle of betrayal, frozen in this moment that would destroy everything. I wanted to speak, to explain, to somehow make this nightmare disappear, but what could I possibly say? What lie could cover this truth? "I can explain," I finally managed, the words sounding pathetic even to my own ears. "Can you?" David's voice was deadly quiet. He stepped into the room and I saw his hands were shaking. Because from where I'm standing, this looks pretty self-explanatory. Marcus cleared his throat. "David, don't." David held up a hand without taking his eyes off me. "Whatever you're about to say, just don't." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I watched my husband's face crumble as the reality of the situation sank in completely. This wasn't just infidelity. This was betrayal with someone he knew, someone he'd trusted professionally. "How long?" he asked finally. Such a simple question. 2 words that carried the weight of our entire marriage. "David?" "How long, Emma?" I stood up on unsteady legs. 3 months. The number hit him like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, leaning against the doorframe for support. 3 months, he repeated slowly. 3 months of coming home to you every night. 3 months of kissing you goodbye every morning. 3 months of telling you I love you while you were... He gestured helplessly at the bed, unable to finish the sentence. "I never meant for this to happen," I said desperately. It just what?" David's voice rose for the first time. "It just accidentally happened? For 3 months? You just accidentally took off your wedding ring?" He pointed at my bare finger, and I looked down in horror. I'd gotten so comfortable here that I'd stopped bothering to put it back on. Marcus stepped forward tentatively. "David, this isn't Emma's fault. I pursued her. Get out," David said without looking at him. "What?" "Get out of your own apartment. Go for a walk. I need to talk to my wife alone." Marcus looked at me, uncertain. I nodded slightly. He grabbed his jacket and keys, pausing at the bedroom door. "I'm sorry," he said to David. "I'm genuinely sorry." David didn't respond. We listened to Marcus's footsteps cross the apartment, heard the front door close behind him. Now it was just the 2 of us, facing the wreckage of our marriage. 8 years, David said once we were alone. He wasn't looking at me anymore, just staring at Marcus's rumpled sheets. 8 years of marriage, and this is what it comes to. I wanted to explain about the loneliness, about how invisible I'd felt in our relationship, about how Marcus made me feel alive again. But looking at David's broken expression, those reasons sounded selfish and cruel. "I felt like we were strangers," I said quietly, "like we were just going through the motions." "So you decided to go? Through the motions with someone else instead?" His words stung because they were true. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Emma? Help me understand how my wife of 8 years ends up in another man's bed for 3 months without me having a clue." I sank back down on the edge of the bed, my legs unable to support me anymore. "I don't know how to explain it." "Try." I looked up at him, seeing the pain I'd caused written across every feature of his face. "I met him at that coffee shop on 5th Street. You know, the one where we had our first date?" David flinched like I'd slapped him. "He was taking photos of the morning light through the windows. We started talking about photography, about art, about life. He listened to me, David. Really listened." "I listened to you." "When? When do you listen to me? When you're checking emails during dinner? When you're taking calls during our weekend walks? When was the last time we had a real conversation about anything that wasn't logistics or schedules?" David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. So, this is my fault? No, I said quickly. No, that's not what I'm saying. This is my fault. My choice. I could have talked to you about how I was feeling. I could have suggested counseling. I could have done a dozen different things instead of... I gestured around Marcus's bedroom. Instead of lying to my face for 3 months. The accusation hung between us like poison. He was right, and we both knew it. The yoga classes, David said suddenly. There never were any yoga classes. I shook my head. The late nights at work you said you had to cover for sick colleagues. I was here. The weekend workshop in Portland last month. We went to the coast instead. Each lie landed like a physical blow. David put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. How could you do this to us? He whispered. How could you look me in the eye every morning and lie so easily? I had no answer for that. How do you explain that deception becomes easier with practice? That each lie makes the next one simpler to tell? I love you, I said desperately. I still love you. David looked up at me then, and I saw something die in his eyes. No, you don't. You can't love someone and do this to them. This isn't love, Emma. This is selfishness. He stood up and walked to Marcus's window, looking out at the city lights below. I've been planning a surprise for our anniversary, a trip to Italy, 2 weeks in Tuscany. The words hit me like a tsunami of guilt. David, I wanted to surprise you. I thought maybe if we got away from everything, just the two of us, we could find our way back to each other. I felt like I was drowning. While I'd been sneaking around with Marcus, David had been trying to save our marriage. I didn't know, I whispered. Of course you didn't, because you were too busy planning your Tuesday nights with him to notice that your husband was trying to fix what was broken between us. He turned back to face me, and I saw that his grief had hardened into something else. Resolve. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Divorce. After 8 years, it would all end with lawyers and paperwork and tea. He division of everything we'd built together. David, please. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice eerily calm. I can't pretend this didn't happen. I can't wake up every morning wondering if you're lying to me about something else. We could try counseling. We could work through this. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Work through this? Emma, you've been having an affair for 3 months with someone I hired for a business project. Someone who's been in my office, who's shaken my hand, who's taken money from my company while sleeping with my wife. The full scope of the betrayal hit me then. It wasn't just infidelity. It was humiliation on every level. I never meant for it to go this far, I said weakly. But it did go this far, and now I have to fire Marcus, which means explaining to my business partner why we can't use the photographer we already paid a deposit to. I have to face Sarah, who recommended him, knowing that her innocent suggestion enabled my wife's affair. I hadn't thought about the ripple effects, how this would touch every part of David's professional life too. I'll tell Sarah it wasn't her fault. You'll tell Sarah nothing. You've done enough damage. David moved toward the door, then stopped. I'll stay at my brother's place tonight. I want you out of the house by the weekend. Out of the house? David, where am I supposed to go? I honestly don't care anymore. Maybe Marcus will let you move in here full time. The cruelty in his voice was something I'd never heard before. This wasn't my David. This was a stranger I'd created with my betrayal. What about our things? Our photos? Take whatever you want. I don't want anything that reminds me of us. He walked to the bedroom door, then paused without turning around. The Italy tickets are in my desk drawer at home. You should throw them away. I won't be needing them anymore. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in Marcus's apartment with the ruins of my marriage scattered around me like debris from an explosion. I heard the front door close, heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard the elevator doors slide shut, and then silence. I pulled out my phone to call Marcus, then realized I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I wanted to disappear, to rewind the last 3 months, to make different choices. But I couldn't. The damage was done, and now I had to live with the consequences. I gathered my scattered belongings from Marcus's floor and walked out of his apartment for the last time. Whatever we'd had between us felt poisoned now, contaminated by the devastation it had caused. As I drove home through empty streets, I realized I was heading toward a house that was no longer mine, to face a future that terrified me completely. David's car wasn't in our driveway when I pulled in at midnight. The house we'd shared for 5 years felt different immediately, hollowed out, like it already knew everything had changed. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at our front door, gathering the courage to face what I'd destroyed. The porch light was on, casting everything in harsh shadows that made even familiar objects look foreign and threatening. Inside, his silence was deafening. Our wedding photos still smiled down from the mantel, but they felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I walked through the rooms we'd painted together, past furniture we'd picked out as a couple, remembering happier times that now felt like ancient history. The kitchen still smelled like the coffee David had made that morning. This morning, when I'd kissed him goodbye and lied about my evening plans. Had that really been less than 12 hours ago? I found him at 2 a.m., sitting in his study in complete darkness, with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look up when I appeared in the doorway. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, his voice rough with alcohol and tears, "trying to figure out where I went wrong. Was I really that terrible of a husband?" His question broke something inside me that I didn't even know was still intact. "No, David, you weren't terrible." "Then why?" He finally looked at me, and I saw that he'd been crying. Why wasn't I enough? I stepped into the room, but didn't turn on the lights. Somehow this conversation needed to happen in darkness. You were distant, we both were. We stopped really seeing each other. So you found someone who would see you instead. I wanted to deny it, but it was the truth. Yes. 3 months, he said again, like he couldn't quite believe it. While I was working late to save money for our anniversary trip, you were with him. The trip. The surprise I'd never get to experience now. You never told me about Italy. Of course I didn't. It was supposed to be a surprise. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. 2 weeks in Tuscany. I thought maybe if we got away from everything, just the two of us, we could remember why we fell in love. He held out the tickets, and I took them with shaking hands. The dates were perfect, right after our anniversary, when the weather would be beautiful, when we both could take time off work. He'd planned everything. I had it all figured out, David continued. The hotel overlooking the vineyard, the cooking classes, the day trip to Florence. I was going to propose to you again, with a new ring, a better ring than the one we could afford 8 years ago. I stared at the tickets, feeling the full weight of what I'd thrown away. David hadn't just been neglecting our marriage, he'd been secretly working to save it. I didn't know, I whispered. Because you were too busy with Marcus to notice that your husband was falling in love with you all over again. The past tense hit me like a physical blow. Was falling in love. Not anymore. I'm sorry, I said, but the words felt pathetically inadequate. Sorry doesn't fix this, Emma. Sorry doesn't undo 3 months of lies. Sorry doesn't make me able to trust you again. He was right, and we both knew it. Trust, once broken this completely, couldn't be rebuilt with apologies. What happens now? I asked. Now you pack your things and we pretend the last 8 years never happened. The divorce proceedings moved with devastating efficiency. David had hired the best lawyer in the city, Margaret Kim, who'd handled several high-profile cases and had a reputation for protecting her clients' interests ruthlessly. Mrs. Chen, Margaret said during our first mediation session, her voice professionally neutral but her eyes cold. Given the circumstances of the marriage's dissolution, my client is prepared to be generous with the division of assets. Generous, as if David keeping our house, our savings, and most of our shared possessions was some kind of gift rather than exactly what I deserved after destroying our marriage. I sat across from him at the conference table, trying to reconcile this stranger in the expensive suit with the man who used to make me laugh until my sides hurt. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I just want this to be over quickly, I told my lawyer. a kind but overworked public defender named James Santos. "My client agrees," Margaret replied smoothly. "Mr. Chen has no interest in prolonging this process. He simply wants to move forward with his life." Move forward, as if 8 years of marriage was something to be discarded and forgotten. The social fallout was even worse than the legal proceedings. Our mutual friends had to choose sides, and I quickly learned that most of them sided with David. Sarah, David's assistant, who had unknowingly recommended Marcus, stopped speaking to me entirely. When I ran into her at the grocery store, she actually crossed to another aisle to avoid me. "Emma, what were you thinking?" my sister Linda asked during one of our daily phone calls. She'd heard the news through our family's efficient gossip network. "David was a good man. You had everything." "I know," I said, curled up on the couch in my new studio apartment across town, a dingy one-bedroom that was all I could afford on my teacher's salary. "I know I had everything. Then why did you throw it all away?" It was the same question everyone asked, and I never had a good answer. How do you explain loneliness to someone who's never felt invisible in their own marriage? How do you describe the intoxicating rush of being desired again after years of feeling taken for granted? "I felt empty," I said finally. "Like David and I were just roommates who happened to share a last name." "So you cheated instead of talking to him about it?" "I know it was wrong, Linda. I know I destroyed everything good in my life for something that was never real." Because that was becoming increasingly clear. What I'd shared with Marcus hadn't been real love. It had been fantasy, escape, the thrill of forbidden desire. Without the secrecy, without the excitement of the affair, we had nothing substantial between us. Marcus had called constantly during the first week after David discovered us, begging me to give our relationship a real chance now that everything was out in the open. "We don't have to hide anymore," he'd said during his last voicemail. "We can be together properly now." But I couldn't bear to see him. Every time I thought about Marcus, I saw David's broken face, heard the devastation in his voice when he asked how long I'd been lying to him. I started therapy with Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes who specialized in helping people understand their self-destructive choices. "Affairs are often symptoms of deeper issues," she explained during our first session. "But understanding the why doesn't excuse the how." "I know that," I said. "I know what I did was unforgivable. The question now is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? How are you going to ensure you never hurt someone like this again?" It was a fair question, but one I wasn't ready to answer yet. I was still too busy drowning in the consequences of choices I couldn't undo. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I saw David at Grind Coffee, the same place where I'd first met Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in line, watching my ex-husband laugh with a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with auburn hair and an easy smile. They weren't sitting intimately, but there was something comfortable between them that made my chest ache with jealousy and regret. When David noticed me, he nodded politely but didn't approach. The woman, I later learned her name was Jennifer, from mutual friends who still spoke to me, looked at me with curiosity rather than hostility. She had no idea who I was, which somehow hurt more than if she'd recognized me as the ex-wife. I ordered my coffee and found a table in the opposite corner, but I couldn't stop watching them. This was David, without the weight of our failing marriage on his shoulders. This was who he could be when he wasn't trying to fix something that was already broken. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw your car at the coffee shop. Want to grab dinner tonight? We need to talk." I'd been avoiding him for weeks, unable to face the reality that what I'd thought was love had just been an elaborate escape from my problems. Through social media, I'd seen that he'd started dating someone else, a client from his photography business. They looked genuinely happy together in his posted photos. It should have hurt more than it did. The fact that I felt more relief than heartbreak told me everything I needed to know about what Marcus and I had really shared. As I sat there watching David with Jennifer, I had a revelation that hit me like cold water. I hadn't destroyed my marriage because I loved Marcus. I'd destroyed it because I was too cowardly to either fix my relationship with David or end it honestly. The affair had been the path of least resistance, a way to feel desired and alive while keeping my comfortable life intact. I'd wanted to have my cake and eat it too, and when that proved impossible, I'd lost everything. "Excuse me," a voice said beside my table. I looked up to see Jennifer standing there, holding 2 coffee cups. "Are you Emma?" My heart stopped. "Yes." "I'm Jennifer, David's friend." She sat down across from me without invitation. "He pointed you out. I hope you don't mind me coming over." I glanced toward David, who was watching us with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "I don't mind." "I wanted to thank you," Jennifer said, which was the last thing I'd expected to hear. "Thank me?" "For letting him go." Her voice was gentle, not cruel. "I've never met a man who's worked so hard to understand himself, to grow from his mistakes. The way he talks about your marriage, about what went wrong. He takes responsibility for his part in the problems." I felt tears prick my eyes. Even in divorce, David was being more generous and mature than I deserved. "He loved you very much," Jennifer continued. "He still does in a way, but he's learning to love himself too, and that's beautiful to watch." I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. "I hope you find that too," she said kindly. "Peace with yourself." After she left, I sat alone with my coffee, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd lost. It wasn't just a husband or a marriage, it was the chance to grow with someone who genuinely loved me, someone who would have worked through our problems if I'd given him the chance. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I did something that would have seemed impossible during the height of my affair. I wrote David a letter. Not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, I knew those ships had sailed. Instead, I took full responsibility for the pain I'd caused, for every lie I'd told, for every moment of betrayal that had led to that devastating night in Marcus's apartment. The letter was 3 pages long, and in it I acknowledged every mistake without making excuses. I didn't blame our marriage problems for my infidelity. I didn't mention the loneliness or the distance that had grown between us. I simply owned my choices completely. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too afraid to do the hard work of fixing it, I wrote. You deserved honesty, and I gave you lies. You deserved loyalty, and I gave you betrayal. You deserved a partner willing to fight for our marriage, and instead, you got someone who ran away the moment things became difficult. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday, the day that had once meant stolen evenings with Marcus. Now, Tuesdays meant therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez, where I was slowly learning to understand the broken parts of myself that had led to such destructive choices. I never expected a response, but David surprised me by calling 2 weeks later. "Thank you for the letter," he said, his voice calm and distant but not unkind. "It didn't change anything, but it was necessary." "I know it doesn't change anything. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did." We talked for nearly an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years, even during our marriage. He told me about Jennifer, about how he was learning to trust again, about the therapy he'd started to process the betrayal. "She knows about the affair," he said, "about everything. I decided I couldn't build something new on the foundation of secrets." I told him about my own therapy, about how I was trying to become someone worthy of trust again, someone capable of honest relationships. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Emma," he said before we hung up. "But more importantly, I hope you learn to be honest about what that is." Those words became my guiding principle. I had spent so long running from difficult emotions and uncomfortable truths that I'd lost sight of who I really was beneath all the deception. Through therapy, through painful self-reflection, and through the devastating consequences of my choices, I began to rebuild myself from the ground up. I moved to a smaller apartment across town, took a new job at a different school where no one knew my history, and slowly started making new friends, people who knew my story and accepted me anyway. I learned to be alone without being lonely, to face problems directly instead of escaping through fantasy or deception. When difficult emotions arose, I sat with them instead of running from them. Marcus and I never spoke again after that horrible night. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd gotten engaged to the woman he'd started dating after our affair ended. I genuinely wished him well. What we'd shared was never real love. It had been two people using each other to avoid dealing with their actual lives. A year after the divorce, I was a fundamentally different person. Not perfect, not without regrets, but honest. The affair had destroyed my marriage, but it had also forced me to confront the lies I'd been telling myself for years. I ran into David and Jennifer at the farmer's market one Saturday morning. They were picking out vegetables together, comfortable and domestic in a way David and I had never managed to be. When he saw me, David smiled. Not the polite stranger smile from the coffee shop, but something warmer. "Emma," he said, "you look well." "Thank you, so do you." I turned to Jennifer. "Both of you." "We're engaged," Jennifer said, showing me a simple but beautiful ring. "David proposed last month." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm genuinely happy for you both." And I was. The jealousy and regret that had once consumed me had been replaced by something better, genuine hope for their happiness and gratitude for the lessons my failures had taught me. "Are you seeing anyone?" David asked. "No," I said. "I'm learning to be good company for myself first." He nodded approvingly. "That's wise." As I walked away from them, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the artificial peace that comes from avoiding problems or escaping through lies, but the real peace that comes from accepting yourself completely, flaws, mistakes, and all. The woman who had once hidden in bedrooms and crafted elaborate deceptions was gone. In her place was someone who chose truth, even when it was painful, even when it was lonely. Someone who would never again destroy something beautiful out of cowardice. That was my real redemption. Not winning David back or finding new love, but learning to live with integrity. Learning that the temporary pleasure of lies could never compare to the lasting strength that comes from facing reality, no matter how difficult it might be. I had lost everything in that moment of discovery. My marriage, my home, my social circle, my sense of self. But in losing everything, I had finally found the person I was meant to be all along. Someone worthy of trust, someone capable of real love, someone who would never again choose the easy lie over the difficult truth. The affair had been the worst thing I'd ever done. It had also been the catalyst for becoming the best version of myself. And for that paradox, as painful as it was, I was finally grateful,